From the studios of Staten Island Community Television, you're watching In the Bleachers, the TV show for the world's most passionate sports fans. Hello, everyone. I'm Pete Alonso's new agent, also known as Jaime Hixson.
And I am still the hottest, baddest, sexiest man on cable access TV, and I have all the women, not only at CTV, but everywhere else that I go to. If you're Pete Alonso's manager. That's okay.
We have to talk more about this young man because what this kid did this season for the Mets exceeded not just expectations, but exceeded hope. Now suddenly the Mets have something to really, really build on for 2020.
Here's the thing. You have a great pitching staff. You have a good five that you're going to lose one pitcher or two pitchers. Because you're losing Zach Wheeler. You lost him because the Mets don't want to open up their purse.
I'm not too sure that's such a guarantee, though, because Wheeler pitched really well for them this past season, and I would like to think that the Mets would be able to at least open up some kind of discussion about a deal, something fair for the young man.
It's the last year of his contract. He's going to get big money. He's going to ask for about at least 5 years, and I don't know if the Mets are willing to go 5 years, and God knows how much this guy's going to ask for. Secondly,
my guess is $15 to $20 million.
Who knows? It could be more because it all depends on who the best pitcher is and who gets the Cy Young and all that other nonsense. And then they go by, all right, well, if this guy's getting this amount of money, then they go by, all right, then they go by the way the first guy got the money. If they have the same or almost the same winning and lost average and ERA, then they'll go and say, well, I want $35 million. If he got $35 million, why can't I get $35 million or $45 million?
Yeah.
You know, that's the deal, and that's what's going to happen. So they may lose him. They may, and that deal with Stroman, did it pan out?
When you think about it, I would say of the last month of the season, it did pan out. He pitched a lot better when he got to the Mets because this time he was able to get a little bit more run support than he did with the Blue Jays. Even though the record didn't really show it, he had a combined 10-13 record. Stroman really gave the Mets rotation a lot of hope for next year. And it's funny that you mentioned Zach Wheeler because apparently Zach Wheeler may not be the only guy that could be leaving the Mets because there's rumors that the Mets might still want to trade Noah Syndergaard because he's going to be commanding a lot, especially in arbitration. He's up for arbitration soon, and the Mets may not want to pony up.
And that's the whole problem. If you have the best starting five or the best starting four, and you know that all you need is one or two more pieces for next year, wouldn't you try to say, okay, you know what? Let's try to play one more time. You know, let's do it one more time. We got Pete Alonso. We got a great team. We're probably going to have a different manager. Do you think they're going to get rid of Mickey Callaway, or do you think they're going to give him a shot? And if they do you think they'll wait until next year and go, okay, let's lose 5 or 6 games and then get rid of Mickey Callaway?
Are you asking me right now?
Yes.
My answer is yes. They're going to get rid of him. Even though the Mets had a really, I don't want to say great, but solid September, and they had that 15 out of 17 run that they had in July and August, there were still a whole bunch of issues that Mickey Callaway still has to account for. First and foremost is how he managed or in this case, mismanaged the starting rotation and the bullpen. I mean, granted, the starters were able to get more length than we would have, than we had hoped for. At the same time, the bullpen was a complete and utter mess. And there were days when Callaway had no clue how to try and bring guys in for a particular situation. And some of the double switches that he did really made the fans scratch their head. This is where the Mets really need to have a good veteran manager to try and make things a little bit better for them. Joe Maddon got fired by the Cubs after yesterday. Why don't the Mets go after him? Plus, there's another Joe who has Chicago ties, Joe Girardi. Why not make Joe, at least invite Joe Girardi over for a little bit of an interview? Here's a fringe name that you might want to consider. Buck Showalter.
Buck Showalter's good. Joe Girardi's good. There's only one problem with Buck Showalter and Joe Girardi. And that is...
They're Yankee connections.
Huh?
They're Yankee connections.
No, that's not it. Because Buck Showalter has managed other teams. But the other problem that you're having is that they command... they want power.
Yeah, they do want power.
They want to do it's either my way or the highway 9 out of 10 times. If you notice that Buck Showalter, if the Mets have a young team, Buck Showalter is good for. If the Mets have an older team, he's not really that good with older players.
Yeah.
For some strange reason.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if, again, Buck Showalter has this system in his head, and if the GM is not willing to go, well, we're not going to give you this amount of power, then he's going to go, you know what, I don't want to be bothered. They rather go to broadcasting. Joe Girardi, same thing. Mm-hmm. If he doesn't get a certain amount of power, such as if a star player decides to stray away and he wants to bench him, the GM and the owner is going to say, why are you benching him? Like the Billy Martin situation with Reggie Jackson.
Yeah.
You know, and even though there hasn't been something like that in many, many years, but I'm sure that does happen. When you're trying to bench your best player just to show him that, hey, I'm the manager, you're just a player.
Tell you what, though, it's really fascinating that you bring up Martin and Reggie. Billy Martin was probably the only manager that I knew of who could stand up to Reggie the way he did when he benched him that afternoon in Boston all those years ago. I don't remember Dick Williams ever doing the same thing with Reggie when he managed Reggie in Oakland all those years ago.
But that's the thing. You didn't have to. There's certain ways of treating people. And as the older they get, sometimes they mature even better. Or sometimes it's the way you talk to the person. Because Billy Martin was an upfront guy, and he would fight you. He was ready to fight that day.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to separate them.
Yeah.
And even though Reggie Jackson swore up and down that he wasn't dogging it, Billy Martin said he was. I mean, you know, it's he said. You know, it's just fascinating that you want a Joe Girardi who I think is a person that wants a little power by going, okay, this is what I really want. You have to do this in order for me to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And with Buck Showalter, I think it's the same way. Now, the guy from California who they just fired,
Brad Ausmus.
You know, was he worth firing for? Was he worth firing?
After 1 year, I would have given him a little bit more of a shelf life, but I think the reason why they fired him yesterday was because they want Joe Maddon. And just so you know, before Joe Maddon managed the Rays and the Cubs, Joe Maddon worked in the front office and was a coach for the Angels for many, many years. And he left a great impression on that franchise.
Well, the one good thing is that Don Mattingly is still the coach.
Good for him.
He finally hired him.
Because Don Mattingly finally got a contract extension from the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees.
The Yankees.
Oh, brother.
Wrong team.
From the Miami Marlins, I should say. And who was the guy that signed off on that contract extension for Donnie Baseball? It was Derek Jeter. One ex-Yankee washes the hand of another ex-Yankee. Now, if only they can get themselves some players.
Well, here's the thing. Again, it has to do with it. Not only does it have to do with where they're playing at, and not only does it have to do with the stadium. I think they're getting a new stadium. But if you're not having the people come in, if the people are not interested to come in, then how are the owners going to say, well, I'm going to bring this amount of money, I'm going to pay for this amount of person, and then in 3 years we're going to get rid of them and break the team down all over again, because that's what they do.
Well, to add to that, the Marlins got their new stadium in 2012, and the city of Miami is still feeling ripped off over the way everything went down.
Well, think of it. They should, because every time they win a championship, or I'm sure they've won a championship, and they just want to break it down because the owners don't want to pay the money because the people are not coming into the stadium.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of winning championships, now that the season is over, the playoffs officially start tomorrow. I should also mention that, unfortunately, a couple of other guys wound up getting fired from their jobs. Clint Hurdle wound up getting fired from the Pittsburgh Pirates.
I mean, he deserved it.
Did he deserve it? He helped the Pirates into the playoffs 2 or 3 years in a row. If you ask me, the answer is no. Clint Hurdle is a good manager. The problem is the Pirates had very, very little talent on that roster. All of the best players that they had wound up going elsewhere. I mean, think about it. Andrew McCutchen was their best player. He's now in Philly. Francisco Cervelli is with the Braves now. And they also traded away Garrett Cole to the Astros. And now Garrett Cole became a megastar with the Astros after 2 years. There's a strong possibility he wins the Cy Young Award in the American League this year. Now, what was that you were about to say?
I'm saying that maybe he'd be good for the Mets too.
Clint Hurdle? Clint Hurdle would be a great idea for the Mets. If anything, he would be exactly what the Mets need. A people person. Not just with the players, but with the front office. Because he can actually get along very, very well with front office people.
But can he handle the New York media? That's the problem.
I think that he can handle the New York media just fine because he's such an easygoing guy. Very few people have had any bad things to say about him. The same thing with Joe Madden. Reporters love talking to Joe Madden. You ask him a question, he's going to give it to you straight. And if he doesn't understand a question, he'll probably ask the reporter to rephrase it a little bit. That way he can know it a little bit better.
Who else got fired?
Let's see. If I'm not mistaken, I think also Andy Kennedy, who used to be a part-time player with the Yankees. Andy Kennedy wound up getting fired by the San Diego Padres with a week left in the season.
Now, should he have gotten fired?
Should he have gotten fired? Let me tell you something. San Diego is probably one of the most dead-end jobs for any manager to take. It's impossible to try and win games with that roster. They've gone, what is it now? 13 years without one single playoff game. Should he have gotten fired? No. The answer is no. He had 4 years. He practically busted his butt trying to make that team better. At the same time, the Padres brought in Manny Machado because they thought that he would be their meal ticket to respectability. the Padres were still a 70-win team during the season. But to answer your question, no. Andy, and I should say Andy Green, not Andy Kennedy. Andy Green was the one that was fired by the Padres, and he was not deserving of that firing. And you know what? He may not be the last one to get fired either. There have already been, 3 or 4 firings that took place? Oh, and I just saw on one of my apps, the Nationals, who, by the way, are going to host the wild card game. I think it's either tomorrow or Wednesday. They're going to offer Anthony Rendon a 7-year deal worth $210 to $215 million. And let me tell you, that guy probably deserves it. Because think of this. The year after the Nationals lost Bryce Harper to the cross-division rival Phillies, everyone thought that the Phillies were finally going to be the next great team in the majors. And what happened? Phillies became a 500 club. The Nationals lost Bryce Harper. They lost a slew of power from their lineup. But what happened? Anthony Rendon became the best player in their lineup. And you also consider Trey Turner, a really good power-hitting shortstop, and a really underrated pitching staff, when you ask me. See what Max Scherzer did for the Nationals this past regular season. Don't be surprised if you see the Nationals, who have been a playoff bust in the past, finally get over that hump and win that elusive playoff game in the clutch and then move on to the next round.
So this is a player that deserves a 7-year contract, and you think he deserves it?
After the year he had, carrying that team into the playoffs, why not? And,
now,
and who is anybody to try and turn down $30 million?
But the problem that you have is that once you sign a guy like that, will you try to get more people? And
you mean try
that amount of money so that you can boost the team?
Are you talking about trying to add potential free agents, or maybe try and cut a deal for a trade?
Yeah, exactly. And then not just go and say, all right, well, we won a championship now, let's break the team down again because we have no money to pay these guys anymore.
Honestly, I don't think it's going to get in the way of that because the Nationals are a relatively rich ball club. They've got really, really steady ownership. So I think it's just a matter of time before, they scour the free agent market and see who's out there.
So with the Mets, going back to the Mets, you have Pete Alonso. Who else do you have on the team that's going to stay on the team, and who do you think is going to go?
Who's going to stay on the team? Alonso, Michael Conforto, Robinson Cano. Of course, he has to stay on that team because he's got that albatross contract of his, which has another 4 years to go. There's also Ahmed Rosario, who, for all intents and purposes, really improved a lot this season. He became a much better contact hitter. I'd like to see him improve his selection of when to try and steal, because he wound up getting thrown out stealing 10 times during the regular season. And you want to see your base stealers really get to know the pitchers a little bit more in order to try and figure out when to steal at the right time. Todd Frazier, in my eyes, I think is a goner. I mean, his power and run production at the plate have gone way, way down in the last 4 years. And I think it's time for the Mets to try and get someone else to get some production at third base. Michael Conforto was their second best hitter this season, their second best power hitter to be exact. Juan Lagares is really interesting because he's a terrific defensive outfielder, but he can't stay on the field because he's always hurt. So what do the Mets do? Do they make him the everyday center fielder, or do they just make him a part-time guy? There's also the issue of what to do with Jeff McNeil. Jeff McNeil busted his tail for that team this season, and he wound up having an outstanding year. I think he was one of the top 10 in batting average for the season, although he slumped kind of badly the last week or two of the year. There's also the matter of Wilson Ramos. He only has 1 year left on his deal, which is next year. He was everything that the Mets could have wanted, and then some. Probably one of the best contact-hitting catchers in the majors this year. But, man, he had his moments where base stealers took advantage of him really, really badly. I wound up seeing some of his numbers. Did you know that base stealers wound up swiping 91 bases against Wilson Ramos during the season? And he only threw out, I think, 17 base runners. That's a really, really, really bad percentage for your starting catcher to have. So I don't see the Mets having that much in the minor leagues behind the plate. Tomas Nido, maybe? Rene Rivera? Those guys are practically like part-time players right now. I think Wilson Ramos is going to be here for at least 1 more year. He just has to try and tinker with his mechanics behind the plate. Marcus Stroman, Jacob deGrom, Steven Matz, those are 3 guys you could definitely count on to be in your starting rotation next year. Noah Syndergaard, it's 50-50 whether he's going to be traded or not. But if he does get dealt, they'd better get quality back for him. Because if not, they are going to get smoked by the media and the fans. Because in spite of all of the injuries that he had suffered and all of the mechanical issues that he had on the mound during games, Noah Syndergaard is a super talented pitcher. I mean, how many pitchers do you know of that throw 100 miles an hour in gas? The Mets got to be really, really careful what they decide to do with him. As far as Zach Wheeler, they have to try and talk to him and come up with a fair solution, a more than fair solution as far as the deal is concerned. As far as that bullpen was the reason why they only won 86 games this season. I mean, don't get me wrong. This year, when you think about it, they really overachieved because the starting rotation was outstanding for all intents and purposes, and they had practically 3 young guys carry that batting order for the majority of the season. There was Alonso, there was Jeff McNeil, and there was also Michael Conforto. J.D. Davis, who was basically a stopgap when they got him from the Astros over the winter, he also had a terrific season. Something's got to be done with J.D. Davis. Either make him a starting infielder or do something with him because he needs to be in the lineup a lot more. But that bullpen, the bullpen has got to be fixed. I don't know what they're going to do with Edwin Diaz. The same thing goes for Jeurys Familia. 2 guys who are under contract for a little bit. There's also the issue of Seth Lugo. Seth Lugo is really intriguing because he can either start for you or he can be a reliever for you. The same thing with Robert Gesellman. Robert Gesellman really disappointed this season, and he was also hurt for the majority of the year. It's critical that he come back 100% healthy and work on some mechanical issues that he had with his pitches to try and be a really useful guy for them for about 60 or 70 games next season. But guys like Paul Sewald or Chris Mazza or a few others, I'm not really sure those are the kinds of guys that the Mets should have to depend on to try and keep leads. Chris Mazza maybe has a little bit of intrigue because he throws some off-speed stuff that can really keep hitters off guard. And some of his pitches really break and fall low towards the plate. So maybe he can do something for them this winter. Maybe they'll send him over to winter ball. One guy who I know is definitely doing winter ball is Tyler Bachelor. And Tyler Bachelor, even though he didn't pitch that much this season, he showed me nothing. So I'm curious to see what he does in winter ball. I think he's going to be sent to Santo Domingo. As a matter of fact, the 81-year-old pitching coach that you like to talk about so much, Phil Regan, he's going to coach Tyler Bachelor in Santo Domingo. That's when he's not too busy playing on the golf course, as he likes to joke around. So the Mets have a lot of work to do in the offseason, and I'm very, very curious to see what they're going to do with some of their guys. There are guys that are definitely a go for next year with that roster. And some others that, quite frankly, the Mets have to decide if they're actually worthy of being on the roster or not.
Well, the one problem that I see is that the contracts that have 1 year, that's the people that you have to sign.
Yeah.
And
there's also guys that have to do arbitration.
Yeah, if you're going to sign them, you're going to sign them. And then sometimes it's better to sign the people that are in arbitration because that way you can trade them quicker. Because that way they can't ask for more money.
Right.
You know? So it all depends. Now, would you trade Thor? Would you trade him?
Would I trade Thor? My opinion is no. You don't trade away a kid with the stuff that he has. If you ask, if you go around the league and you can get a great hitter for him, then maybe, but because then you'll still have three. Let's say he goes and Wheeler goes, then you still have two starting pitchers. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? Well,
you should. A playoff team normally has at least three,
maybe 4,
3 to 4 deep starting pitching. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, because the Mets have nobody coming up.
No, not even. That's why they really have to replenish that farm system, because right now, aside from maybe 1 or 2 guys, I don't see anybody helping that roster right now.
And what is it with this rip shirt nonsense all of a sudden? And they're ripping shirts. And
they do that for every single game-winning hit that they do.
It gets ridiculous sometimes.
Oh, they're just having fun and celebrating. Leave them alone.
Going across the river and through the woods, you have the New York Yankees.
Yep.
Who have a lot to prove.
Oh, they've got a hell of a lot to prove. And let me tell you, this series with the Twins, I'll say this much. Both of these teams are perfect matchups for each other. They bring power, they bring really solid pitching, and the managers that they have on each side are very, very underrated. Because when you think about it, who really saw Aaron Boone turn the Yankees into a playoff team 2 years running? He just got here, and he's made them a playoff team 2 years in a row. Do you know he's the first manager to ever take a team to the playoffs his first 2 years as a major league manager?
That's kind of unfair, though, because that team was already built to begin with. If he started from scratch or had 1 or 2 players here that were good and so forth, like the Mets, but that team was already stacked. If you can't win with that team,
I don't know. I mean, really last year's team pretty much overachieved for the majority of the year. And then came the Red Sox series, and the Red Sox just outclassed them. But this year, the series with the Twins, these are two teams who are not the same as they were in the decade of the 2000s when they met each other 5 times and the Yankees wound up winning all 5. All 4, I should say, 2003, 2004, 2009, and 2010. This year, the Yankees have so many guys that they could count on to get a big hit. The one thing that I worry about, though, is that starting staff. Because now, after CC Sabathia and Masahiro Tanaka and James Paxton and Jay Happ,
if he's healthy.
Yeah, assuming that he's healthy, yes. And we're not even mentioning Domingo Germán, who wound up getting sent home by the Yankees because he wound up getting busted for domestic violence. And he wound up being suspended for the rest of the year by Major League Baseball. So now the Yankees...
That's one I don't understand, because, let me explain something. If he got busted, right? He got busted, but in the eyes of the law, it's the law that has to take care of it, not the team. The only reason why the team is getting involved saying you have to leave is because they don't want the media to come after him and so on. And
no, it's not just that. It's also because they have morals.
Again.
And he wound up getting caught in public smacking an ex-girlfriend or a girlfriend.
I'll put it to you like this. You don't know what really happened. You don't know what really happened, and until you find out what really, really happened, then we can talk. But until that time, you can't talk, because that's like the way Beyonce's sister went after Jay-Z. We never really found out what the hell happened.
We saw the tape, and it said everything. Solange wound up beating his butt. Why? Because he was habitually cheating on Beyonce.
We found out that she hit him.
He did. She did more than hit him. She wound up beating his ass.
We never really found out what happened.
What happened was Mr. Carter wound up
not talking.
What happened was Mr. Carter was habitually cheating on Beyonce, so Solange wound up taking it upon herself to beat his butt in that elevator and teach him a lesson.
Again, that's one of those things where it's either he said, she said, and the truth in the middle.
Hector, the tape said the whole thing. Everybody saw the whole thing.
Fine. Where does it say that he cheated? Where are there tapes that he's cheated?
What about those constant days of working with Rihanna?
Rihanna never said he cheated. She cheated. Not that she's going to say either way.
Do you think that she's going to utter that? Of course not. She's keeping that to herself.
You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. And that's the bottom line. You'll never know what really happened until someone speaks up and says, hey, this is what really happened. And the other person says, no, this is what really happened. And then both people are telling the truth, and then the truth is really in the middle. Because sometimes the person that's actually really telling the truth, that's the person you got to believe. But at this point in time, you believe nobody because you don't know what really happened. You're just saying that because you saw it on video. Oh, big deal. That doesn't mean diddly squat. But there are times where I see that what's his name got busted for dating a 15-year-old.
Are you talking about Luis Polonia?
Luis Polonia, right? That was not his problem. That was not his fault. That was the mother's fault for letting that happen.
Oh, brother.
And then
seriously.
he's the one that gets suspended for something that he didn't know.
Let's move on from this, please, because this really isn't getting us anywhere.
But my whole point is that right now, do the Yankees right now, if they don't make the playoffs, does the manager get fired?
First of all, the Yankees are in the playoffs. They're in the division series.
If they don't go all the way.
He's not going anywhere.
If he loses the first round.
He's not going anywhere.
Because there have been times where managers have done this, and like, look at Joe Girardi.
Precisely.
He got him to the playoffs, and they just didn't want him.
Well, that was a feud that was really boiling over between Girardi and Brian Cashman. So, quite frankly, Girardi's exit wasn't a matter of if. It was a matter of when. They just decided to dump him after the season ended.
But that was the thing. Here's a guy that got... Now, I would love to be the fly on that wall to figure out, okay, what really happened. Because did he want the power that I said he wanted? Or what really happened that Girardi and they couldn't get along?
Simple. It was philosophical differences over how to handle the roster. Cashman wanted him to probably play certain guys that Girardi didn't want to, and Girardi probably wanted him to make some deals that Cashman didn't want to. It's typical manager, general manager powwows that happen with every team.
But here's what you have to understand, and maybe I don't get it. Who has more of the influence? Who knows more of the team? The GM or the manager?
Joe Torre once said it best after Bernie Williams got dumped by the Yankees all those years ago. He told Brian Cashman this. He said, never forget that this game has a pulse. In other words, don't forget that these guys are human and that these guys have done so much for the franchise that they don't deserve to be just ousted the way they do. So if you were to ask me that question, the managers know a lot more because they've played the game a lot more in the past. That's why guys like Mike Scioscia and Torre and also Mike Matheny and also Ron Gardenhire and Dave Roberts have all made the playoffs and won playoff series and have gone to the World Series because they, quite frankly, they see everything that goes on out there in that field.
But if the GM is going by statistics and computer, and let's say the coach or the manager, I should say, says, you know what, my gut feeling is to leave this guy in. Or my gut feeling is, you know, this guy should play. I don't care what the upstairs is telling me. I think he's going to play. If he succeeds, he's a great wizard. He knows what he's doing. If he fails, he's a blockhead.
All he needs to do at what happens on the field, and if he sees what happens on the field, that's all the proof that he needs to know.
But that's
sometimes you can't
saying.
Sometimes you cannot rely on statistics alone. Statistics don't measure a player's heart.
But that's what
his effort.
I think that's what
his work ethic.
I think that's why they fired Girardi, because they wanted to be more stat-wise. And the manager for the Yankees, what's his name? Man, I forgot. The manager for the Yankees, he's more to stats, and he's letting him run it a little bit. So it seems.
It's all
because he said that we're running it with stats.
It's all this sabermetrics that's going on in the game. Sometimes these sabermetrics don't ever tell the whole story.
Understandable, but that's what they're going by now, and that's why they brought him in. Because sometimes, like I said, managers play by their gut, and either they're great if they do it well, and they're blockheads if they fail. I mean, look at the what's his name, the manager for the Mets. Imagine if some of those things that he did really worked. He would have been the greatest mind of all time. But it didn't work for him.
No, it didn't.
And that's my whole point. Now, you're bringing in the guy. Where's Lou Piniella when you need him? You know?
I'm not really sure Lou Piniella wants to manage anymore. He's in his mid to late 70s right now, and
so,
I think he might be enjoying his retirement.
81-year-old pitching coach. I like to say that because a lot of people came in and said, oh, look, they're bringing in an 81-year-old coach. They started age-shaming him.
They don't know what they're talking about, please.
They started age-shaming. People like to discriminate about a lot of things. Color, creed, everything, age, and so on.
Jack McKeon won a World Series with the Marlins as a 73-year-old.
Exactly. My point is, when you go to the hospital and you're old, the majority of the time, the hospital don't care because you're old. If you're a young guy or you're a baby or you're a teenager, that's when they care more. But my point is, when it comes to the media, a lot of the times they will come and say, oh, look, you're bringing in this old man. What can he do with a younger generation?
That's why the reporters use the computers and pens and notebooks, and why the managers and players take part on the field. There's a big difference in knowledge. Sometimes some of these reporters don't know what they're talking about.
Because a lot of
Remember when Joe Girardi wound up taking the Yankee job? There was that famous back page headline of the Daily News, Clueless Joe. And what happened? He won 4 titles. He wasn't so clueless then.
Exactly. When you win, you're never clueless. When you lose, then you're clueless. And that's the whole point. When you really lose like that, then you're really clueless, as if you don't know what you're doing. Even though you do know what you're doing, it just doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen because the guy doesn't come through. Even though you know he can hit him, let's say. But all in all, that's going to be the big thing nowadays, which is it going to be stats and computers, or is it going to be the manager from his gut, play from his gut? That's going to be the big controversy over the years to come, and how the GMs are going to be more influential in games than managers, because I've heard that even some of the GMs will call up the manager and say, why aren't you playing him instead? They'll force him to play him a lot of times.
And there are also these managers that have their own book of players and whatever numbers they have against a certain starter or reliever. They'll always go by the book. Yeah. And then there are other times they won't go by the book.
But sometimes you can't go by the book. But my point is, you know how you always have the lefty-righty? If it's a righty hitter, you got to bring in a lefty. If the guy's a great pitcher and he should be able to strike out anybody. If you're in the major leagues, and you're in the major leagues and you're a damn pitcher, you're there for a reason. Even though your stat is more, you hit less against a lefty than a righty. You hit more against a righty. But if you want to try righty versus righty once in a while, and depending upon who that pitcher is, you let him pitch. You don't bring in a lefty.
Well, with 15 minutes left.
Roger Clemens struck everybody out, lefty and righty.
Well, with 15 minutes left, we really need to try and.
Oh yeah, the Rangers and hockey.
I was actually going to discuss the rest of the playoffs first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As far as the Yankees and Twins are concerned, I mentioned it's like looking in a mirror when these two teams take the field against each other. Great power, really underrated starting pitching, Although I think the Yankees starters are going to be really hurt with Domingo Germán now suspended for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
The other guys are solid, but let's see. Probably the guy that had the best season after Domingo Germán was probably James Paxton, because he finished the year with a 10-game losing streak.
Wasn't there another pitcher that was hurt besides Germán?
I know CC Sabathia was in and out of the lineup because of his knees.
Because Germán should be suspended if that.
And Luis Severino, of course, just came back to the roster a week ago, and they're going to make him a very important part of that rotation.
Yeah, and he would have been great, because he hasn't pitched. That's like having a new arm.
Mm-hmm. And the bullpen is going to be a really important part for them, specifically Chad Green. There's a strong possibility Chad Green is going to be used as what they call a beginner, instead of a starter, where he starts the first inning, and then he'll go maybe 1 or 2 innings, and then they'll go to their bullpen. In this case, they'll probably bring in CC for maybe 2 or 3 innings. But I'm worried about Sabathia. Not only are his knees killing him, his stuff has gone way down.
Well, he's retiring at the right time then. If things are going that bad for him, he's retiring at the right time.
Mm-hmm. As for the Twins, you think of the Twins, you think of Nelson Cruz, who was their big-ticket free agent for this year. He's the reason why the Twins made the postseason. He's the reason why they won the Central Division this year. And they wound up ending things on a rather strong note going into this series. As far as who I think wins this series, I think it goes 5 games. This series could go either way, to be honest with you.
Who's got the edge, though?
I think the Yankees have the edge because they have the home field advantage. They're almost even as far as power numbers go. As far as pitching numbers go, I think the Twins have a slight advantage. So, bullpen, I think the Yankees have a slight advantage as well. But if you go with starting pitching, probably the Yankees' 2 best starters right now are James Paxton and Jay Happ. And maybe
what about
afterwards,
Tanaka?
Masahiro Tanaka gives them a little experience, but there have been times when he's been running a little hot and cold this season. So I'm a little worried about what he's going to be able to do in a really, really big spot. Not only that,
but in the playoffs, he does well. If you look at his stats in the playoffs, he comes through.
That was only one series, which was the Cleveland series a couple of years ago. Last year, aside from the Boston game, he's very, very, very iffy for me. So I hate to say this, but I think the Twins steal this series. As far as the 2 wild cards, I actually like Tampa in this one because I think Tampa has much better pitching than the A's do. So I think the Rays will face the Astros in that other division series. As for the National League, Brewers and Nationals is very, very intriguing. If it weren't for Christian Yelich getting hurt at the wrong time, the Brewers win this series. But other than that, Anthony Rendon right now could be the best hitter in either lineup. I think the Nationals win that wild card, and the Nationals play the Dodgers in the division series.
And who's got the edge on that? Who's winning now? You said so. The Dodgers win.
I like Tampa to face Houston in the division series, and I like Washington to face the Los Angeles Dodgers in the division series. This is the Dodgers' best chance to win a World Series right now. They're stacked in the batting order. They're stacked in their starting rotation. Clayton Kershaw, of course, is the ace. Then after that, they have Hyunjin Ryu, who's been outstanding. Walker Buehler, who's been terrific. That is a trio I would not want to face if I'm a batter.
I'm curious, just for giggles, who's going to go to the World Series? Which 2 teams?
I still like the
Off the
Dodgers
top of
coming
your
out of
head.
the National League. And you know what? I think the Astros come out of the American League, too.
Again?
Yep. I think the Astros win their second pennant in 3 years. This time, I think the Dodgers win the World Series.
Now, wouldn't it be great if it was the Yankees versus Dodgers? Do you know how much publicity that would get?
Oh, that would be a ratings cash cow for Fox.
Because they would come out with, oh, look at Tommy Lasorda all over again and bring back how the little Penguin and all them other people come out and play. And
all these celebrities from each coast, athletes from each coast as well, the mayors from each coast. Then they'd be making comparisons of the two cities.
Yeah, exactly. And that would be fun. I think that really would be fun. That would be fun.
I'm holding out for a Yankees World Series appearance, though, because quite frankly, the fans deserve it. The fans deserve it. And so do the players, too. There are some players who've never won a championship before, and it'd be kind of cool to see them get that elusive ring. It would be wonderful to see Aaron Judge win a title in his third season.
I mean, it would just be fun, but all the haters that the Yankees have out there would be going, no, not again. We don't want the Yankees to win.
It's funny you mention that because they asked somewhere, who needs this World Series the most? Which team needs this World Series? I think a theory.
The Yankees.
Well, the Yankees always need to win the World Series because they want to keep their fan base going.
The reason why I say the Yankees is because right now they're so stacked with hitting.
Mm-hmm.
And the momentum that they have and the publicity that they get, if they don't win this year, they're going to have to do something next year. They're going to have to blow people's mind with trades next year then.
This is true.
You
know who needs this series the most, though? Not just any division series or league championship series, but who needs to win the World Series more? And you'll be real surprised to hear this.
Who?
Tampa. You know why?
Why?
Because any championship that they win would not only bring their fan base or whatever is left of their fan base back to the ballpark, it would probably reinvigorate any talks that the Rays would have with the Tampa-St. Petersburg area. Because right now, the Rays have been at a dead end in trying to get a new stadium. They just had a proposal rejected almost a year ago, and now they're back at square one. It's critical that they win a championship so they can try and push along talks to try and get a new deal for a stadium.
But the thing with Tampa, even though, that would be great and all, but the thing with Tampa is that once they win, they break the team up because there's no money in Tampa.
Well,
just like the Marlins. Every time they've won, how many times have you seen them win games, and all of a sudden they have to break the team in 2 years because they have no money?
Well, let's see what happens if they win this championship first before we talk about anything else. All this talk of baseball, we have not even covered either football or basketball or hockey.
Let's cover them quick. You ready?
Yep.
Giants win. Did the Giants win by a miracle, or is the kid true?
Daniel Jones is a good player, but the Redskins are horrible. Even with Dwayne Haskins, the rookie at quarterback, they cannot stop anybody. They can't run the ball. The quarterback is constantly committing turnovers. He can't take care of the ball. Daniel Jones has turnover problems himself. He threw 2 picks yesterday, but Dwayne Haskins threw 4 picks. I want to see what the Giants can do for an encore. The Jets, of course, had a bye, so we'll be seeing them hopefully get that first win of the year next weekend.
Yeah, and I sent you a text on that saying what the Jets should do.
Yes, I saw that. I'll tell you what. Some of these names that were dropped are pretty interesting players. Trent Williams, for one. The Jets need help on the offensive line in the worst way. Would Trent Williams bring back some really good value? Maybe. But then there's the issue of what to do about the secondary. Jalen Ramsey has been popping off at the mouth for the longest time. He wants a new deal. He thinks he's the best in the league. Well, let's see him put his money where his mouth is in the event that he gets traded someplace. And let me tell you, the Jaguars are going to want a lot for him.
And you also got the backup quarterback situation, too. The Jets need a quarterback until this guy comes back.
Yeah, the Jets need a backup quarterback in the worst way.
And that's why I say next year,
sign somebody.
They should find someone, even if it's from the crop that's coming out and next year, because next year is supposed to have a good crop of quarterbacks coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Pick one of them guys and let him sit. Let him sit for 2 years. Let him sit for 3 years. Just let him sit there.
Yeah,
let
but there's also
because if the guy goes down, then at least you have a decent quarterback that you can say, well, you know.
But if you draft a guy, then what does that mean for Sam Darnold? It's not going to make him feel secure.
It may not make him feel secure, but if you tell him, hey, listen, we just want him as a backup quarterback, it's up to him to decide if he in his brain.
The
because
kid
it has to do with his brain.
If they do draft a kid, what's that kid going to feel like if he's constantly having to sit on the bench for 2 or 3 years? He's not going to sit well with that.
Well, look at the backup quarterback for Tom Brady. Okay, enough said. Okay, look at the backup quarterback that Coughlin really wanted, but because the owner said no, that poor quarterback that's behind Tom Brady is not moving.
Yep.
But he's learning, but you only learn for 3 years, and then you get up and go.
Well, as far as what's going on in hockey, the season
that's
officially
starting this year.
begins.
This starting this week.
Mm-hmm. The NHL season officially begins this Wednesday. They're going to have a doubleheader on cable. As far as the Rangers are concerned, they already have their roster set, and it includes that second overall pick from this past June's draft.
Will they get enough publicity like football?
They're always going to get publicity, just like the Giants and just like the Yankees do. The Rangers get first dibs on media attention, always.
But you know what seems to get a lot more media? Football.
Yeah.
People get hungry for football.
Yeah, they do.
I don't know what it is about football, but they get hungry for football. They forget about baseball. They forget about hockey. They forget about all the other three. I think the NBA is the only one that can top football or come close to football.
And for the record, the Rangers start the season Thursday night against Winnipeg. The Islanders are going to start their season Friday night against the Capitals. And then the Devils start their season against the Winnipeg Jets on Friday.
Close. Before we go, who wins?
Who wins the Stanley Cup?
No, who wins the game? Quick.
I think the Rangers win their home opener against the Jets this Thursday.
And Devils?
I think the Devils also win their home opener against the Jets. I think the Islanders are going to get smoked by the Capitals.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're off the air. We're going to go off the air. You heard it. You heard the master of the predictions.
And thanks to Kenny Graham on the other side of the glass.
The Graham man.
For everyone here, I'm Jamie.
I'm Hector.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. We're done.